I know there's a couple of questions about portal guys that Oklahoma's in on right now. I think it's kind of it's funny how some of these kids come full circle, but it seems like from everything that I've seen and heard, it seems like Austin Stogner's coming back to Oklahoma. I think it's not he hasn't announced it or anything, but everybody that I've talked to, it's basically a done deal. So a couple of guys that I've heard some rumors on that Oklahoma's offered um, for now is there's a couple of offensive linemen that Oklahoma's in on, a couple of Alabama kids that have hit the portal. Um, I haven't really heard anything specifically on a quarterback perspective. A couple of kids from Oklahoma State that hit the portal. The Braylon Presley kid will get a good look from Oklahoma. Um, Dominique Richardson, I believe, is his name. Richardson's the last name. I'm trying to if I think I got that one right. Again, he's another kid that Oklahoma's in on as well. A couple of receivers, Dante Cephas from Kent State is a kid that Oklahoma's in on. The Singer kid from Arizona, who's a true freshman this year, over 1,000 yards receiving. Oklahoma's in on, and so there's tons of guys that Oklahoma's offered and are looking at. I think it's one of those things that we'll keep an eye on. Um, we'll keep an eye on in terms of how serious some of those conversations end up being with where Oklahoma's in on. And I think there's obviously there'll be a couple of questions with in relation to coaches, but I think that'll probably get sorted out towards kind of after the bowl season. After the bowl season plays itself out. There's some questions if LaDamian Washington, as Oklahoma's interim wide receivers coach, if he'll be retained in a full-time role, or they'll go after some other guys. Rashad Samples was a guy that was rumored to have some mutual interest, but Arizona State has hired him as their wide receiver coach, and then there's still some discussions about defensive coordinator on who that could possibly be if Ted Roof decides to move on, or if Oklahoma just kind of moves away from Ted Roof. But all of that will be interesting. I mean, not just for Oklahoma's perspective, but it's so interesting to see where some of these kids, some of these kids will end up going. I know that it's not official, but I've seen some stuff on social media that Drake May is probably going to hit the portal as well. And I think from what I've heard, he's very strong Alabama lean, if he was to go there. And so anyways, it's so interesting to see to see what happens for some of these teams that reload and things like that. So I talked about Ted Roof, and so from what I've heard, and of course things can change. I don't know that he's going to necessarily be fired, but I wouldn't be surprised if, from what I've heard, if he goes into more of a off the field analyst type of role, and then someone else is brought in as a defensive coordinator. Of course, like I said, these things change sometimes about as much as the recruiting cycle changes, but um, I think that's the desire internally, and I've heard some names. I've heard Arnett as possibly a guy that would come over as the current defensive coordinator at Mississippi State, as possibly someone that would be interested. But it's just early speculation at this point. But that'll probably start making itself be known a little bit more after the bowl season's ended.
A lot going on all over the place. guys coming and going all over the place. Yes, I I found that amusing when I saw that earlier today about Austin Stogner almost assuredly coming back to Oklahoma. Took his
Mhm.
1 year, left with Spencer Radler, and caught 20 balls, and now most likely coming back. Hmm.
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly a position of need for Oklahoma. You know, they've got a couple of younger kids there. You know, from a tight end perspective, but you know, Oklahoma loses you know, their top tight end after this year. So he's a guy that knows the culture at Oklahoma. Obviously, it's a little bit different um, as well than it was when he was here. But you know, he's been a guy where Oklahoma knows what they're getting in him. So I certainly like the move.